So we want to disturb this thing. So let's get into that. Let's come back up here to where we have our cutting planes. Let's go grab the disturb thing that we've been using over and over and over again. I guess we're calling it jitter cutters. So let's put that here. And there we go. We don't need to do this. We're not gonna do the multiple grouting things on top of each other. You could create more grout within these chunks, within this piece, if you wanted to. I'm not going to. That would be more of an advanced thing if you really felt the sim needed it. I don't think we do. So I'm just gonna say we'll do, these single cuts on top of each other. So I deleted that class binding and then turbulence offset. Let's just come in here and maybe do this a little bit different this time just for fun. Let's do like a sparse convolution that's it's a little bit bigger. And actually for a moment, I'm gonna say, let us do just one maximum point. Kind of like before, this will help us to see what we're doing. Or rather not one max point. Let's do a, let's put this back to 18. Let's do a force of 1. So now we have 1 point. We have this guy here. So that's what we're getting from our noise so far. I'm gonna say, how about half that? But then maybe we'll make it much stronger, something like that. We could even keep the turbulence at 3 is probably fine. And let's add in another one of these things. Let's take that. This guy though, maybe we'll make him have a higher frequency thing. And again, this is all just the artistic side of it. You're just coming up with something that you think looks good. I like combining multiple noises together, ones that are low frequency with ones that are high frequency. Maybe offset a little bit or something. I don't know, just for fun. That looks cool though, doesn't it? Ooh. That doesn't really matter. Cool. So it looks nice. It's just however you want to do it. Pretty sweet. And so we got that going on. So now we're going to have much more interesting cutters here. We're going to want to go back up here. We don't want to force just one anymore. And now it's going to do a much more interesting fracture. We won't have those straight pieces that we saw a moment ago. You can imagine it's going to take a little while once we run this through all of the pieces. So there we go. So there's our new cuts. Here's our new explode. Boosh. So that's really interesting. And that's also 1,879 pieces. This is probably too much. Because again, we have 26 pieces to go through. We could stick with this, and maybe you would do a final look. A lot of these pieces are really small, is what's happening there. I'm just going to say for now, let's maybe just limit this down to max 12 cutters, and you'll see it'll go down quite a bit in complexity. So this is much more reasonable, I think. Yeah, 700, I can live with that. Great. So we got all that. Now we have this. One of the reasons why we wanted to determine the names first and not let this do it is we want to know who the parent was. If only for debugging, we want to be able to look at this and say, or even this one and say, okay, how come all of the subfractured pieces coming from P64 are having a problem? And then I can come back here to this loop, find P64 and quickly solve it. We may not actually end up doing anything simulation with this, but it's just a good way to debug later. Also though, is we need to make a constraint network. So we're gonna need to do our connect adjacent pieces, and that works on regular geometry, not on this. So we need to basically determine the name first. So here we are with this. We're gonna use our old friend adjacent pieces from service points, which will work pretty well. It's created 4,271 constraints, which is fine. I'm actually gonna maybe make it a little more efficient here. Still more or less the same amount, but just done much faster. Points per area refers to, it's going to scatter points all over the surface and see which points are close to each other in order to determine these constraints. Don't worry too much about that. Again, see the previous lessons for discussion on that. The constraints in this lesson are actually going to be pretty simple for once. So there we go. We made constraints. Because we are creating constraints, polylines, and pieces at the same time in this for loop, they're both going to have to be output at the same time. We don't have two outputs from the for loop. So because we're actually going to end up merging these together, we need to make a group to help us split it back out later. So I'm just going to say group constraints grouped. So we'll say constraints here. Cool. And then on this side, we can leave this around or get rid of it. Actually, I'm just going to get rid of it. On this side, we have our regular pieces. We don't technically need another group. It's kind of redundant, but I think it's also maybe a little clearer. I'll say group. Well, we will. We're going to want to know this. So group chunks, and actually the reason why we want to do it is we have all these pieces. We have 700 pieces. We're going to determine very soon after this for loop, we're going to have to determine when the start times are, like when they should start falling into the abyss. We're going to want the start times for all of these pieces to be the same start time. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, and again, we haven't done this yet, but we're going to do this. We're going to want that start time to be based off of the splitter, this thing in the center. More accurately, this one. This guy is going to be compared to the location of this. So we're basically going to say for every piece in here, how close are you to the center? And because the center pieces are the first to go, the distance will directly say your start frame. Now, again, why am I telling you all this now? Well, because we want all of the pieces that we just made here. Oops. We want all 700 of these pieces to start at the same time because they're all going to move as one glue thing. We don't want some of these to start but still be glued to pieces that can't move. Also, these two sides are going to be moving away from each other. This side's going to move to the right. This side's going to move to the left. We don't want some of these pieces that are glued to each other to accidentally end up on the wrong side. So all this is to say, we need to now pack the packed pieces. This is an advanced technique. We have 700 pieces here that are all dots, of course, but when we pack the packed, it's now all one. It's just one dot in the middle. Oh, there it is. There it is. That's all one dot now. I'm selecting the point on the inside. I'm in selection mode 2. Then I press T to make an edit. Now I can move that one thing. When I'm back here, there's lots of different dots. If I move them, they move individually. But again, I want to move the whole chunk at the same time, which is what will happen here. I think this will make a little more sense later on, but suffice to say, that's what we want. We created our pieces, we packed them all up, we said, you are one of these situations where you are all chunked up. I'm going to say pack chunk, just so let's clearly go together. Later on, once we determine the start times, once we determine that, when we unpack it, we'll simply transfer that attribute across. And so all the pieces will have the same start time, all the pieces will be on the same side. But for now, that's that. Great. Now there's a little bit of a weird thing here. I'm going to want to keep copying and pasting this file cache thing and changing the names like we promised we would earlier. When I copy and paste file chunks, especially when they're hooked up to complicated things like that, good idea to go into manual mode to paste it, so that way I can hook it up, change the name, initial pieces, and now when I come out of it, it will, now it's actually performing that task, and then we can save it as this new thing. So it's just doing the one thing for now. I'm going to say turn off single pass on this. And now it's going to perform all 29 pieces. It's going to take like a moment, and then we can save it to this file cache. And we'll have all the benefits of the earlier file caches, the version number and all that jazz. So let's just let this chew on this for a moment. All right, so it's all done, and let's actually save it. It's cached because the file thing, the for loop just ran. Saved, load from disk. It occurs to me that if that didn't have loaded disk on, then this probably didn't have loaded disk either. So make sure that that's on so it actually reads the thing next time you open the file. Okay, so there we go. So now we have 5,500 pieces. That's a lot of pieces. We don't really know if that's all. I mean, I can tell you right now, that's not all packed pieces. If we just look back at here, in fact, all of this is the constraint network, except for 29 primitives. So what does that mean? Let's just go down here and split it out. So here's all the constraints are on this side now. Very good. I'm going to get rid of that template. So these are all the little glues that are going to hold together the individual chunks. So we'll call this like split out constraints. And the right side, of course, over here is going to be the actual chunks. Now there's still going to be 29 chunks because that's essentially what went in the first place. And there it is, 29 pieces. It's only 29 pieces still because, again, we packed for everything that we actually came up with. We made an even more all-encompassing pack here. So if we actually wanted to see what they looked like, we could just immediately unpack it. And we're going to delete this, but just to show you, we ended up with approximately actually 5,000 pieces anyway. And let's just take a quick look at it just so we can revel in it. Won't take that long. There you go. So here we go. We've got a lot of really cool looking pieces here. Awesome. We're gonna have a lot more once we get through that the grout thing too. But this will be how these big pieces break up into smaller pieces. Will be like this. Very good. So we don't need any of that for now.